Hello, and thank you for joining us for this in-depth discussion with unlocking the next wave of adoption in crypto, which I personally think is going to be largely driven through utility and the application of real-world use cases. And I think there's nothing better than to talk about Lightning in that case. I've got the pleasure of talking with the co-founder and CEO of Lightspark, David Marcus. Lightspark is a great partner of ours, and so I'm excited to dive in a little bit more. Just to set some context as to the framing of some of the questions, we're actually going to unpack some of the findings from a survey and a report that we released recently that was based on 3,000 global consumers. And then we're also going to dive in into how that context applies to the partnership between Lightspark and Zero Hash and how we can apply Lightning and cryptography more generally to real world problems. So, David, thanks very much, and it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So just before we kick off, I think it's just pertinent to call out a couple of key findings from the survey. The key finding was that there's definitely a strong conversion between traditional finance and crypto. Innovators such as Stripe, Interactive Brokers, Shift4 are all leveraging crypto, and I think there's an interesting crossover eventually to Lightning. And I think secondly, which would be interesting to hear how your conversations are going, David, around how consumers are more cautious engaging with what they term to be crypto companies. We found that 41% of consumers are wary of engaging in crypto with companies that they have no prior experience with. So without further ado, David, it'd be great. Obviously, a lot of people know who you are, and I know that you're pretty active on Twitter, and I kind of use Zero Hash's Twitter to follow you because I don't tweet myself. But it'd be great to share more about your background. And I think, honestly, what motivates you? You can probably do a lot of different things. What motivates you to build what you are building today?
Well, thanks for having me, and just to get started, Ed. I mean, look, I feel that it's almost an injustice to people of the world to see how money moves or doesn't move, rather, today, and we're still basically dependent on infrastructure that was built in the 60s and 70s. There's no open interoperable standard for value on the internet. And as such, money moves in batch processes, not Friday after 5 p.m., etc. And there are, of course, like a lot of new innovations domestically, but internationally, money still moves the same way. Basically, it moved in the 70s. And I've been wanting to change this for a very long time. And I've been, at first hoping that someone else would figure this out. And then it, of course, didn't happen. And we're still in the same place. And so I decided that I had to take the matters in my own hands and join like-minded people around the world to try to make it happen. And that's been now the fight of my life, so to speak, to try to make this happen with whatever time I have left.
I like it. And then in terms of, can you share just a little bit more context? Because I know some of the listeners will definitely have some context on Lightning, but I think there's a couple of, I would say, maybe not buzzwords, but I think if you could explain, because actually I was having this conversation because I mentioned to my wife at the weekend that we were going to have, she was like, what are you doing this week? And I said, that excites you. And I said, I'm talking to you. And so then I was trying to explain Lightning, UMA, Lightspark to her. And so I don't know if I did a great job. So how would you explain it to my wife? How do you explain it to somebody who isn't in crypto, has never really heard of these concepts? Like, what is Lightning? What is UMA? What is Lightspark?
So let me elevate a little bit. I mean, so today, basically, 2023, we have a proliferation of domestic real-time payment systems. In the US, we have FedNow that is getting traction. In Brazil, you have Pix. In India, you have UPI. In Europe, you have SEPA, et cetera, et cetera. So almost everywhere around the world, you have real-time payment systems. But these real-time payment systems are domestic, use different currencies, use different address formats, and don't communicate with one another. And as such, if you're trying to go from a US bank account that has real-time payments on FedNow, dollar denominated, uses routing and checking as an address format, and you want to send money to, say, Brazil that uses Pix and Brazilian reais, you have to use the correspondent banking system and SWIFT that still moves about $5 trillion a day. And we believe that Bitcoin will serve as the only viable net neutral settlement asset between real-time payment systems, different currencies, different account formats. And the reason it can only be Bitcoin is because it actually is the thing that looks and behaves the most like the internet does today from a governance standpoint. And so if you believe that Bitcoin is this net neutral settlement asset, like, in the same way that when you send an email, you have SMTP and TCP/IP, you're not thinking about these things, but that's the way that email actually gets moved from one provider to another. Bitcoin can be that, but so if you believe that Bitcoin is that thing, then you have to make it move faster and cheaper than on layer one that is very secure, but expensive and slow. It takes 10 minutes more or less to get a block confirmed and added to the chain. And so Lightning creates payment channels that are real time, really cheap, private, and secure to move Bitcoin that can now be used to transport value on the internet natively as a global standard. And so that's what Lightning is.
Excellent. And then how does UMA tie into that?
So UMA actually is a layer on top of it. It's a standard that, and UMA stands for Universal Money Address. And so it's basically like an email for money. It's an email format like thing, which is basically $ add zero hash, for instance. And you can then determine what currency you want to get paid in, and you can give that address to anyone else. And the currency conversion happens at the edges of the network. So you can send dollars in the previous example that I was talking about to Brazil. You can actually send dollars that get converted for the fraction of a second that it's transported on the Lightning network all the way to Brazil. And then it gets converted into Brazilian reais and made compatible with PIX, which is the real-time payment system in Brazil. So now you have an end-to-end, real-time, 24/7, cheap transaction layer between dollars and Brazilian reais. And of course, that you can replace Brazil and US with any country, any currency. And you have an interoperable address format, which is basically human readable, also supports a lot of the compliance requirements that regulated entities need to fulfill, and then provides a standard to exchange rates, FX rates, between Bitcoin to target currency between sending and receiving institutions.
Yeah, no, fascinating. I think maybe just to push you a little bit on that, because I think where Coinbase has been particularly strong recently with their marketing is actually, I think, really personifying the concepts. So actually, I'm going to be dog fooding some of the products that we've been building with Lightspark, and one of which was actually I wanted to send a colleague who's based in the Philippines a gift. And it's actually really, really hard, right? And so that's kind of a basic example. But I think, another example is we often talk cheaper is better. To a lot of people, that doesn't really matter, right? So I'm based in the US, I'm fortunate. Cheaper, does it really change my life? Potentially not. But I think, one of the things that we've discussed in the past is, for example, when you make things really, really cheap, you can actually pay people more frequently. And so I know one of the things we spoke about was, for example, wages. The economy today, as it's largely done, is I'm effectively given my company a loan. I get paid for my work today in 2 weeks or in a month's time. And to me, I'm fortunate that doesn't affect me. But that's not how a lot of people live. 70% of Americans still, if they have $1,000 charge, it puts them in a precarious position, and that's the US. And then you think more globally. So I think what would be interesting is diving through maybe. I think that conceptual layer is really, really interesting. But when you think about the use cases to make it more tangible, so my example of sending money to my colleague, or for example, the streaming of being able to get my payment today, which because you make it so much cheaper and so much easier. But could you walk through some of maybe the use cases that really excite you, whether it's payouts, if it's streaming, if it's tipping? Like I think this just bringing it down to a level where people say, I can now use this tomorrow.
I mean, it's all of these things. It's basically, I actually think that the archaic rails that we're dependent on for payments globally right now are basically holding global GDP back in a pretty significant way. And the reason I think that is that, if let's say you're an Uber driver, an Airbnb host, a YouTube creator, or Spotify creator, and you're getting paid only infrequently, and not, to your point, just when you actually complete the task that you're going to get paid for. So the creator economy, the gig economy, is very global in nature,
Mhm.
and the long tail is getting paid every so often. Like, so, really 3 6 months time frames sometimes if you're really on the long tail of it, and that shouldn't be the case. It's not like today you're waiting to accumulate thoughts of 10 emails until you actually send an email to someone or text message. You just send it whenever you feel like it. And money should move around the world in the same way that any other piece of data travels on the internet. And so we believe that that's going to unlock a lot of use cases, streaming money to people as they perform a certain task or create a certain type of content,
Mhm.
creating money flows that are real time for people. And as such, I think that the value of labor is going to trickle down globally much faster and much sooner than it currently is because of the current constraints. And I believe we're going to unlock a great deal of global GDP by enabling money to move much faster globally.
Yeah, no, I'm very much aligned with that vision. I think what would be, I know that you've been traveling quite a bit recently, and I'm just curious about, there's definitely a conflation that we come across between crypto, Bitcoin, Lightning, and I always try to say, look, crypto is technology, not an asset class.
Mhm.
But I'm curious about it. There's definitely been, you just need to look at Congress, for example, in the last few weeks. There's this heavy conflation, which you could argue are headwinds. I'm just curious around, and our survey, for example, reveals that does permeate down to the everyday person when they potentially see crypto, that potentially makes them nervous. I'm curious about the decision makers that you're meeting. Firstly, what are the type of conversations that you're having? Which sort of companies? And in those conversations, what are you hearing around I would say the context that exists within
Yeah.
cryptography at the moment?
Well, I think that, first of all, not all crypto is equal.
Yep.
I think that Bitcoin is a little bit different. And you see it like even today, FASB, which is the global accounting standard
Hmm.
body, just released a new guidance on how to recognize for the value of Bitcoin on corporate balance sheets. Um, and so it's kind of interesting to see how Bitcoin has become more mainstream, more acceptable by large regulated financial institutions. There are a number of
Hmm.
spot ETFs in the waiting that will likely be approved shortly. And so I think that Bitcoin has more regulatory clarity than any other asset. The other part of your question was around like consumer reluctance
Hmm.
to use crypto. And I think that's a really important point. The way that we are thinking about Bitcoin and Lightning is more as an under the hood type of technology. I used the analogy earlier of when you send an email, at least most people don't think about SMTP and TCP/IP as the underlying thing that makes the email move. And so I think the same should apply for money. You should be able to transact in your home currency, and that's how your goods and services are priced in your country, and that's how most people want to transact. And then you can use Bitcoin and Lightning as an interoperable layer between the different currencies and the different payment systems, and enable money to move globally using that as a net settlement asset and layer. And so I think that's really important. I think our view is focusing on the benefits of the technology, the
Hmm.
decentralization of it, the fact that you can move value natively, and building products and services at the edges that enable real types of companies and financial institutions to actually onboard and use the technology. And that's one of the key drivers of our partnership with Zero Hash, which is we provide the Bitcoin and Lightning layers and capabilities, and Zero Hash provides the translation layer for companies that don't want to touch Bitcoin and can actually use the services by just coming up with dollars and good API interfaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I think moving the technology from maybe the foreground to the background, I think, is something that ultimately, to your example of emails, I think is a good example. Just on the partnership with Zero Hash, I'm curious about, you obviously at Round Money 2020 announced several partnerships. I'm curious about what does that achieve, what does that unlock, And then, happy to talk around what do we think that the partnership between us unlocks. You used the example of, for example, groups that understand the power of movement of money or the movement of assets, but don't effectively want to actually touch the asset that's moving, and that's not uncommon, right? And so that's where effectively we can leverage the tech stack of Lightspark, and effectively allows us to offer this as a service to our end customers, extract away the whole concept and the whole technology, even the concept of crypto. And so then you are applying this to remittance platforms, payroll platforms, anybody that is moving money between different localities. So just on the partnerships that you've announced and the ones that you're looking forward to, what are the sort of framing and what does that unlock?
Yeah, so at Money 2020, we basically announced the launch of the UMA standard, the Universal Money Address Standard, and with that, a number of partners, including yourselves. And so it's basically two categories of partners. There are, exchanges, wallets, banks that are going to be able to do this themselves directly and implement UMA and provide a consumer experience that is what consumer expects. Basically type a UMA address like an email address and send whatever currency you want 24/7 to whatever endpoint you want. We're going live within the next 2 weeks or so in about 48 countries with those partners. And then the partnership with Zero Hash, which is really around, to your point, like enabling a broader reach of these services and these capabilities to institutions and companies that will want to have the benefit of sending and receiving money in real time 24/7 and providing also a UMA address to their endpoints and their customers and businesses, but without touching Bitcoin and Lightning. And that's where I think the capabilities that we bring to the table combined with Zero Hash's capabilities are going to unlock a lot of value for all of these companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's important to know is that we're going to be launching this early next year, and every single one of our partners, whether that be Stripe, Shift4, Interactive Brokers, or the on-ramps that we service, MoonPay, all have immediate access effectively to Lightning. I think that's really powerful in terms of the distribution that Zero Hash can provide to the millions and millions of customers that we power on a daily basis. And so that increase in adoption, I like to think of more that we lead to a stepped increase in terms of accessibility in that. Just one thing that I wanted to touch upon, because a lot of people talk about stable coins. Again, you spoke about that not all crypto is born equal. And I think there's this interesting subcategories that are being born if you talk to groups around, for example, tokenization. If you talk about this concept that the banks were very interested in blockchain but not crypto, people are very interested in stable coins but not Bitcoin. Can you talk to me a little bit about how effectively stable coins can interact with Lightning?
Yeah, so stable coins will make their way onto Lightning in 2024. There are a number of protocols and initiatives that are going to enable the issuance of new assets and tokens on top of Lightning. And I think, the way that I think of stablecoins is actually as an optimization tool when transactions are starting and ending with the same currency. And so they can benefit from the full decentralization of the underlying network and the efficacy of it, like, being super cheap and fast of Lightning. But at the same time, be an optimization in terms of cost, because you don't need to exchange the asset at the edges of the network every single time, despite the fact that given the depth of liquidity of Bitcoin against fiat, this is relatively cheap globally right now. But I think, the key for me is really to distinguish payment systems that solely depend on a stablecoin, in which case you solely depend on a centralized institution that is actually managing a reserve, versus using stablecoins in certain types of transactions when it's actually more beneficial, but the underlying payment systems is fully decentralized. And I think that's the benefit of building on top of Bitcoin and Lightning, which makes the work more complicated, because Bitcoin and Lightning is complex and hard to tame, so to speak.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it provides a really decentralized, fast, cheap, global 24/7 payment network.
Yeah, and maybe as we approach the tail end of 2023, you mentioned that very shortly you'll be live through partners in close to 50 different countries. Is there something else that sticks out to you as you look towards 2024? I mean, this space moves at such a pace, so it's hard to kind of say, okay, this is really what excites me. But I mean, as you look to, and obviously I'd love to think that our partnership going live in early 2024 is one of those things. But what
Certainly
are
is.
some of the things that excite you as you look forward now?
Well, I mean, for us in 2024, what really excites us and what we're going to be focused on intently and, with a lot of energy is really trying to, make UMA work for all of the partners that are going to come on this network. Because,
Hmm.
it's not, I don't believe in build it and they will come. And so we have to build it. We have to help partners onboard, and then they have to offer the new payment experience and abilities to their own customers. And so we're going to be right there, really close to our partners to make this really work and to get the flywheel going on the network and to get as many people as possible with an activated address on a network globally, able to send and receive money 24/7. And that's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of assistance, a lot of capital and incentive deployment. And we're going to do all of the above to really make it work in 2024.
Well, we're really excited to be partners, and excited for what
Likewise.
2024 brings. Thank you.
Thank you.